PJNet.tv. It is 9 p.m. on the eastern coast of the United States, and we are running a bumper. Let me check to make sure. Yes, the recording's working, and we are streaming live. We have a chat room waiting, and we have a guest waiting, so we will count down to Studio 8. There's that countdown. Told you it was coming. Well, good evening and welcome to PJNet.tv this Thursday night. And I can't wait to get started. We've got two wonderful guests. It's like wasps. How do you say the plural of wasp? Well, it's kind of like guestesses coming up tonight. And the first Thursday of every month, we feature our brother in Christ and PJNet family member, Kenn Edwards. He is standing by, ready to... what are you ready to do? What do you do?
Well, I'm ready to share from my heart about what the Lord's doing.
Well, let's look back over your shoulder, or backwards in time. Had the opportunity, one of the things I like to do when I'm kind of resting, reclining, is I put on a blog or a podcast of some kind, and I put your podcast on, and I don't know how long it took me to go to sleep, but the part I heard sounded pretty good. A girl had managed to get herself
out. The introduction is what I want to know.
But your brain doesn't sleep, Ken. It
doesn't. Yeah,
it doesn't.
Keeps going thinking all night long.
Yeah. So, yeah. But I was rather fascinated. Now, this podcast journey started what, 2 months ago? How long?
Yeah, about 2 months ago. That's right. And every 2 weeks I put out another podcast. Some of them have corresponded with the study guide that goes along with my book, My Footprint for God. And some of them are standalone. The one we released last Friday was a standalone issue. And the one that I'm working on right now that'll come out at the end of November is actually a standalone new podcast as well. So the one last week was on the slippery slope of debt. And we talked about that briefly last month, how that debt can creep up on us real easily if we're not careful, especially when we're living paycheck to paycheck. And CNBC.com did a survey, and they showed in 2017 that 78% of American workers said they are living paycheck to paycheck. And that's really tough when we have no margin, no extra room in our budget to handle problems. And this young lady was in pretty good shape, managing her payments until she ended up in divorce. And all the credit was in her name. So she was stuck with $30,000 of debt. Quite an amazing story. If you're interested, they can go back and listen to the podcast. You can find it really any place. And of course, the podcast name is What's So Important About My Legacy? And all of the topics each 2 weeks is basically on things having to do with our legacy, financial planning, estate planning, things to be able to leave a spiritual and financial legacy for the Lord. And that's really the theme of the podcast.
I put your website, Footprint for God, footprint, singular, for God, yes. Singular, not yes. Footprints for Gods. Is there links to your podcast on your website?
Certainly is. You can go to the website, look across the top for the menu tab that says Legacy Podcast, and there you'll find the most recent podcast all lined up in a row in the player. So real easy to find, footprintforgod.com.
Now, the inspiration to do these podcasts grew out of a kind of a beta project, Bible study on Zoom type thing, and so I guess a couple of months into it now, when you go into these things, you have these delusions of grandeur that you're going to be a celebrity and people are going to be ringing your phone to book you at speaking events at $30,000 an appearance plus expenses.
How do I sign up for that?
How about the reality check? Has reality set in now? How do you feel in terms of your initial expectations and where you're at now?
Well, actually, it's done fairly well. Now, they say that the average podcast has about 50 downloads. And so my first 2 downloads, I had 36 downloads. So that was reasonable. It's a little lighter now in the last couple of ones, but and many of our PJNet family are authors, and they know how difficult it is to get those books to fly off the shelf. It takes a little bit of work and effort and some self-promotion, and so it is a challenge. But I want my writing and my ministry to be a legacy that my children and grandchildren will be reminded why my wife and I serve the Lord. And that's why the podcast is entitled What's So Important About Our Legacy, because we want to equip people to have the tools and the knowledge and the understanding to be able to build a legacy that points people to Christ. And the podcast that we're working on right now to edit, it'll come up in a couple of weeks, the title of it is Redefining Our Legacy. Redefining Our Legacy. Investing in the next generation. It's easy for life just to pass us by. If we're not careful, we'll just kind of take one day at a time, put one foot in front of the other foot, and life just slips away. And if we're not careful, if we're not deliberate, we won't necessarily leave a path that really points our family to Christ. And so the concept of this particular podcast episode is to be deliberate, intentional in our walk with Christ in the way that we position our legacy or build our legacy, as I like to use the terminology that goes along with building my footprint for God. But to build our legacy in a way that will leave a lasting footprint that tells our family that we love the Lord and that we serve Him, and He's the reason why we do everything that we do. So in the back of the study guide, I have a set of forms where people can go through and list all of their assets and their liabilities and the special people in their life. But the guest that we had for this podcast that's coming up, his name is Dr. Brian Kaluth, and he actually has a tool called the Legacy Organizer. He can actually find it at legacyorganizer.org, and it is a downloadable version in a PDF version, or you can actually buy a print version of it and walk your family through the exercises of identifying not only all of the things that I've mentioned, in our study guide, but other things that are even more important in helping plan a legacy. One of the neat things that we talked about, he has 100 questions for you to ask, for your family to ask, about your past. And he tells us it's really exciting to be able to take in at a family gathering like Christmas or Thanksgiving, and to pull this legacy organizer out and take those list of questions and ask Grandma and Grandpa, who did you date when you were growing up before you met Grandma? What was your first kiss like? Who are your friends and what were your hobbies? So that your family really can learn and understand who you are and what your makeup of an individual really is. Then he also has tools in there to be able to take in and help organize all of the financial tools. He points out something that's really true, and of course I would say the same thing, and that is many times in a family, the wife takes care of some items, and the husband takes care of others. And if we're not careful, what will happen is one spouse will pass away who always takes care of the checkbook, and the other spouse will be clueless where all the bills are and how things are paid and what the account numbers are and where the passwords for the online access is. And the whole point is by taking a little bit of time and investing in your future, you can organize your legacy and organize these documents so that you'll be able to be better prepared in the event of a passing away of a friend or a family member.
Must be tough. I can't remember my own passwords in so many cases. I hate that they keep making you change it, you know. It's like, I don't mind if they make me change it and I can use one I've used before because I can just rotate, you know, back and forth. But when they, you know, no, you used that one 2 years ago. And it's like, golly, you know.
Online security is very important.
Yeah.
But it is a pain, especially when you have to change those passwords every few months and you have to have 2,000 passwords, it seems like, in order for all the accounts that you use.
I know. And so now, how do you know your guest? I forget his name. How do you know?
Dr. Brian Kaluth.
How do you know him?
He is actually a pastor, not a former pastor. I don't know Brian very well personally. I have seen him in many different events, you know, like on social media and different places. And I had a good friend, actually on the next podcast, Gunnar Johnson, where we talked about generosity, who actually linked me up with Brian Kaluth and said that he'd make a great guest, and we're on the same page as far as wanting to build a legacy for Christ and make sure that people live a generous life and remember the Lord, you know, in their estate plan. And so that's how I found Dr. Kaluth.
So you mentioned earlier that your pace is kind of a podcast every 2 weeks. Did I hear that right?
Correct. Every other Friday.
And I believe that these are less than an hour, like 40 minutes, something like that.
Actually, they run about 20 to 22 minutes on average. So they're not very long at all. In fact, JD's wife, Diane Wininger, she sent me a message that she was going to listen to it on the way to some appointment on Friday morning. I asked her how long it was, and she said, about a 20-minute drive. And I said, well, good, you can listen to it on the way and then listen again on the way back.
Yeah,
because
when I set my appointments, I'll have to tell them, no, I can't do it then because the podcast is on.
There you go. Yeah. Actually, busy people, getting them to sit down very long is very challenging. And so we used to have a mind where we could sit down and listen to a sermon for 45 minutes and stay engaged. Then we could get to where it was 30 minutes, and we'd have a hard time keeping people's attention after 30 minutes. But I think now, much more than 10, 15 minutes, we begin to lose people. And so that's why long enough to be able to help get a strong enough point across, but short enough that anybody can do that on their exercise or commute to work or some other approach to their life.
I have kind of figured for things of this nature, like this program and like your podcast, where you're trying to hold that attention, I think 20 minutes is the sweet spot, and that is modeled after the typical worship service. You will have about 30 minutes of praise and music and offering and things of that sort, and then the pastor will preach, speak about 20 minutes, and then saving about 10 minutes for an invitation. And when I think of a 20-minute speech, so to speak, I have people that have actually, called me to get some counsel. I'm doing this presentation or speech, and gosh, I've got to go 20 minutes. I said, no, you don't. Well, yeah, it's got to go 20 minutes. That's the time allotted. I said, you need to go 7 minutes. They say, what? Yeah, spend 7 minutes telling them what you're going to tell them. Then spend 7 minutes telling them. And then spend 7 minutes telling them what you told them. You're at 20 minutes, no 21 minutes. So, no problem. But that approach has, if you're kind of new at it, it helps to break it down. Because 7 minutes is a whole, 20 minutes is a long time.
Yeah, it can be. But if you break it down, actually you're better off even to give them back a few minutes. If you went for 15, 16 minutes, and then especially if you had the opportunity to open it up for questions and answers, and then that cuts your time down. But people will not sit there for a long period of time and just listen. And so it's important that you keep your message on point and short so that they'll absorb as much as possible.
Well, the other basis for that model is if you watch network television, you're watching 7 minutes.
That is probably true. And then they have 3 minutes of commercials and then another 7 minutes,
Yeah.
And so that's very true.
All right. So in a 20-minute podcast, how much time goes into producing it itself? You've got to contact the guest, you've got to make arrangements. And you mentioned earlier, busy people have a hard time sitting down for 20 minutes. Well, you were referring to the audience, even more so some of the people that you're trying to get as a guest.
Yeah, I would say from start to finish, probably about 3 hours to do a 20-minute podcast. You have the pre-work. You have to kind of line out a script and come up with some questions and kind of have a good plan on your dialogue. Then you actually will do the recording, which takes 45 minutes or so, time you set it up, tear it down. And then the editing takes several minutes in itself. Sometimes they go quicker than others, and sometimes you have to do a lot of edit out the ums and the, and so it takes a little bit longer. But so probably 3 hours from start to finish. But it is a different type of a medium than print, and so busy people are more inclined to listen to something than to sit down and read. And if they read it, they'll be more inclined to skim. They'll read the opening, read maybe the first line or so of each paragraph, and then read the close. And in a busy society, it's getting harder and harder to keep people's attention for very long at all. What some of them do on the podcast is you can actually turn the speed up. So instead of listening to it
I've seen that.
a regular time, you can do it to where it talks a little faster so that people will be able to take and, get through it faster.
I think the point that you're bringing up, people, you have to compete for their time.
Yeah.
And we could sit here and criticize and say that shouldn't be, but you kind of have to work with things the way they are until they can change.
Yep.
And I'm kind of applying that when I look at a lot of the people that we're working together here at PJNet or authors. The devotional has been given rise by the short attention span.
Yeah.
And it amazes me. I actually, this was not part of, but I was sent a book. I actually won it in All Nature Sings.
Yes.
From our friend Ben Cooper. Folks, I don't have time. I don't get enough sleep. I mean, if anybody can do this, if I can do this, anybody can do this. And there's a little bookmark. You can literally, in 5 minutes, and the time it takes to you can literally sit down with a cup of coffee. But the problem with the printed word is, if you are going to read, you are not going to be doing anything else. With a podcast, that's a game changer.
Yes, it really is. A lot of people listen to podcasts as they commute, drive back and forth to work. You can listen to podcasts while you're walking or exercising. You can actually put them on while the ladies are running around the house, taking care of chores, or guys are mowing the grass. There's many different ways to utilize and multitask and listen, as well as do some other physical work.
Well, I used to take when you're taking a shower, I would take my phone in there and play something, that I can listen to while I'm in the shower. But trying to play my phone that loud has blown the speaker in my phone. And speaking of debt snowball, I just got my AT&T bill today, and I am just rejoicing that I had made last month the final payment on a phone, and the bill went down substantially.
Fantastic.
And I see, so I think I'm going to go out and buy a new car. And get this, that you can't, I didn't make this up. I ought to go get the darn envelope. The first thing, an envelope is, okay, they got the bill, but around the bill, an 8.5 by 11, you're eligible for an upgrade.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's a society. Yeah, that's our society. We're always being bombarded with messages, you got to have more. And that's what makes it difficult to keep your debts paid off. Because we see that idea, that new car, that new phone, having that new computer, all those different tools are carrots dangling in our face. And it wants us, the marketing wants us to go deeper and deeper into debt. One of the rough things with refinancing your mortgage, and I know it's done a lot, but the challenge is when you refinance your mortgage to pay off your credit card, if you don't charge credit cards up, that may be okay. But if a year later those credit cards are creeping back up, you just made your situation worse.
You made it worse. Takes discipline.
So it does take lots of discipline and lots of work.
Well, I can remember, and we're out of time, but I just feel compelled to share. When my daughter was growing up, you'd go into the store and she would see the shiny object, and, oh, Daddy, I need this. And
need it.
Life lesson, okay, is I told her, I said, if you didn't know you needed it until now, you don't need it. And I think that was a real teachable moment for my daughter, but I think we need to remind ourselves of it, because I just paid that phone off, and of course the speakers, to have a phone call, I have to use the head, these things, because the speaker's no good. But no, you don't need a new phone just because you paid the other one off.
You might be able to put a new speaker in that one.
Well, you never know. Anyway. Ken, you've already mentioned your guest upcoming, and I think you've got one lined up after that. How far in the future do you kind of get things lined up?
I have most of the podcasts recorded through the end of the year.
Wow.
I have a couple of more that I want. This is November and December, so I have probably into early January, and so many of them go along with the topics in the study guide, Building My Footprint for God. So it's a natural fit. And then when I get past that into the first of the year, then all of them will be fresh content each month. It'll always be around financial planning, estate planning, legacy planning, any types of things around us building a spiritual or financial legacy for God. And it's easy to find. Just go to footprintforgod.com, look for the Legacy Podcast tab, or you can download What's So Important About My Legacy from any of your podcast platforms, and I hope you enjoy it.
All right, Ken, we got that website up there. Ken, a lot of wisdom we get the benefit of once a month, and it certainly has been an encounter tonight, and we look forward to doing this again next month. Thanks for sharing so generously your wisdom.
Thanks, Coach.
And your experience. Well, folks, that don't go anywhere. There you see an aerial view of the Eagle's Nest control room and studio. And what a pleasure it is to do this. And folks, in just a few minutes at the bottom of the hour, J.D. Winninger every Thursday night takes us on a tour around the Cross W Ranch. And we're certainly looking forward to that. So, don't touch that dial. Yeah. Folks, I'm having so much fun. I hope you are too. You all are such a blessing to me. Before I leave, and we'll be back in a few minutes, I'd like to leave you with two questions to ask yourself. The first is, what is the boldest thing that you've ever done for Jesus Christ? And the second one, how long ago was that? Now, folks, you may not think planning your finances is a bold thing to do, but very few people do it. Hard to think about the fact that we're going to die, isn't it? Take those steps. I certainly hope that none of us here would ever be satisfied with our answers to either of those two questions.